Actually, that carol was written in the 19th century by Unitarians, and it was highly controversial at the time because it was a Christmas carol that did not mention Jesus, as most of the Unitarian carols in the 19th century. So there's that. So early one Christmas morning, several years ago, Bob and I were sitting at the airport in Boston, awaiting a flight to visit family and friends for the holidays. As we sat there, I was the first to spot him. The chubby, older man wearing a red and green plaid flannel shirt, gold-rimmed spectacles, and the most magnificent white beard I have ever seen. Adults and children alike began pointing, elbowing those who had dozed off around them. Knowing smiles began to dawn on every face. It was clear that everyone else around us was thinking the same thing, that Santa Claus was booked on our flight. As it turns out, this gentleman sat directly behind us on the flight to Atlanta, and we were able to overhear much of his conversation with the woman sitting next to him. Eventually, she asked the question on the tip of everyone's tongue, "Are you Santa?" He let out a really big chuckle and then said, "Well, looking like this, who else would I be?" Apparently, after several weeks of bouncing children on his knee, posing for photographs, and listening to the lists of what everyone wanted for Christmas, Santa was heading south for a bit of rest and relaxation, no doubt wanting to work on his tan before heading back north. And that was how Christmas came for me that year. But it wasn't so much the all-too-rare opportunity to rub shoulders with Santa at the airport. Rather, it was in seeing a room full of exhausted and irritable people brighten as one among us came carrying the spirit of Christmas. I am certain that this is what W.T. Ellis meant when he said that it is Christmas in the heart that puts Christmas in the air. That's what Santa brought to all of us that morning. Not the Christmas tucked away with the gifts in his oversized carry-on, but the Christmas that is kept alive from year to year in our very human hearts. I know that for me, it's what keeps me coming back for more, and always somehow has, despite my misgivings, my skepticism, and my disappointments. To this day, in this season, I have to work hard sometimes to keep my skepticism from becoming an excuse for being jaded and cynical. And so, like many of us, I hold fast to the pendulum that swings back and forth between belief and disbelief, between the wild-eyed wonder we knew as children and the devastation many of us felt when we got the skinny about overweight men who wear red suits. But what that morning in the airport said to me as I saw the beaming faces of those around me is that there is still something within us that wants, against the odds, good reason, and all that we know of history, to believe in the mystery and the magic and the miracle of it all. This festive season, perhaps more than any other, can put our faith and sometimes our patience to the test as we wrestle with myth and with metaphor. James Fowler, who identified the stages of faith development, describes how we relate over time to the great stories of our faith and culture. His point is that while we constantly change, the stories remain largely the same. To explain Fowler's stages, Susan Smith applies the example of Santa Claus here to good effect. She explains that trust is the foundation of all faith development. Everyone has observed that infants confronted with Santa Claus in a shopping mall reject this large, loud, brightly colored stranger and press more deeply into the safety of their parents' arms. Later, she says, we learn stories about Santa Claus, stories that we must believe literally to build the foundation through which any other kind of understanding becomes possible. We begin to ask detailed questions about Santa. Is it true that he has flying reindeer? Are they only the ones mentioned in the poem, Rudolph and Donner and Blitzen? Or are there others, and what are their names? This is Fowler's second stage, called the mythic literal. Now, when we are young, such stories shape our sense of self helping us to describe who we are and how the world around us works. When we are eventually confronted by some playground traitor who says that there is no Santa, we reaffirm our sense of identity by sticking to our story. At some point, though, we see that these stories may not be literally true, and eventually we demythologize old Santa. Once that happens, we have several options. We can interpret this moment as one of entering into an adult way of knowing, or we may believe that we have been intentionally duped by our parents, or we can believe that the persons who continue to tell this story are somehow just ignorant of the truth that we have come to know. This stage represents Fowler's fourth stage and is where he believes most adult Unitarian Universalists are, and where, frankly, he finds most Unitarian Universalists are stuck. He says of us, "Your problem is that you have stage 4 adults, the demythologizers, teaching stage 2 children, the literalists. So you tell them a wonderful story, and then you say, but of course it's not true." His advice is that we must decide on what we wish to teach and by what stories we will teach it, and that then we must stand by those stories. In saying this, he reminds us that children have a deep need for stories, and he reminds us that we as adults have a deep need too, though in a very different way. In Fowler's fifth stage, the one that goes beyond asking whether or not a story is literally true, there is a marked capacity for living with paradox, for moving beyond self-certainty to appreciate life's contradictions that allow us to appreciate the power of stories on a deeper level. It's no accident that this stage rarely comes before middle age, as much of what makes it possible is seeing life's limits more clearly, integrating our defeats, and recognizing how our past decisions now narrow the options before us. In this, we develop a second naivete, a second chance to unite the power of symbols and myths and stories with their deeper conceptual meanings. We find ourselves with an ironic imagination through which we see the power of the stories and images that give shape to our lives, even while knowing that they are relative and but mere slices of reality. The danger that comes with this stage, though, is that with an understanding of the paradoxical nature of truth, we can easily be lulled into inaction, cynicism, and complacency. And that is why I believe we so desperately need this season of wonder. That is why we need a season that ignites the imagination and stirs the soul. And that is why we need stories that aren't factually true, but true nonetheless, because they speak to the human condition of our undying need for hope, the hope that freedom and justice might reign upon the earth, that light will overcome the darkness, and that peace might be born again, taking root in our very human hearts. Einstein once said that there are two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. Friends, there is more life to be found in the latter than the former. G.K. Chesterton, the great English philosopher, once reflected on how his relationship with Christmas had changed over the course of his life. As he put it, "As a child, I was faced with a phenomenon requiring explanation. I hung up at the end of my bed an empty stocking, which in the morning became a full stocking. I had done nothing to produce the things that filled it. I had not worked for them, or made them, or helped to make them. I had not even been good, far from it. And the explanation was that a certain being, whom people called Santa Claus, was benevolently disposed toward me. What we believed was that a certain benevolent agency did give us those toys for nothing. And I still believe this way. I have merely extended the idea. Then I only wondered who put the toys in the stocking. Now I wonder who put the stocking by the bed, and the bed in the room, and the room in the house, and the house on the planet, and the great planet in the void. Once I only thanked Santa Claus for a few dollars and crackers. Now I thank him for stars and others' faces and wine and the great sea. Once I thought it delightful and astonishing to find a present so big that it only went halfway into my stocking. Now I am delighted and astonished every morning to find a present so big that it takes 2 stockings to hold it, and then leaves such a great deal of me still outside. It is the large and preposterous present of myself, as to the origin of which I can offer no suggestion, except that Santa Claus gave it to me in a fit of fantastic goodwill. In this sacred season, may our hearts remember the promise and hope that they hold. May we be filled with wonder at the great gift found each day in our own stockings. And may our enduring gratitude for this gift inspire us to live into the fullness of our lives and change the world with our love. So be it.